Once upon a time, a small dwarf lived in the city of Nicaea. His name was Little Muk. He didn't remember his mother, and when his father died, he decided to wander the world and seek fortune. Little Muk left the city and followed a big road for 2 days. He was very tired and hungry, and on the third day from the top of a hill, he saw a large, beautiful city decorated with flags. Summoning all his strength, Little Muk headed for this city. The dwarf was wandering gloomily, dragging himself in the streets. Suddenly, the door of a house was thrown open, and an old woman came out on the doorsteps and cried, come here, the lunch is ready." At the same time, a number of stray cats and dogs ran into the hospitable house from all of the side streets. Little Muk followed them into the house. When the mistress saw Little Muk, she was startled. However, when she found out he was also homeless, she let him stay in her house and look after the cats and dogs that the house was packed with. He served them food at lunch and put them to sleep on soft feather beds in the evening. Little Muk was quite bored with the old woman, as he saw nobody but the cats and dogs, and he was thinking of leaving this house. Once, when Little Muk was looking for a lost kitten, he looked into the furthest chamber. There, he accidentally dropped an ancient lamp, and it broke. Little Muk got very afraid that the old woman would get angry and decided to run away from her. But his shoes had long since worn out, and luckily in the chamber there were huge slippers with turned-up toes. Little Muk, without pausing to think, put them on and took a walking stick with a lion's head to prevent himself from falling down. The dwarf went out of the house quietly and dashed out of the city. In a field, he decided to rest for a while, but he realized he couldn't stop because his legs were running by themselves. He tried to fall down and turn, using his heels, but nothing helped. In despair, he waved his arms and cried like cavemen cry to their horses, "Whoa, whoa!" The slippers suddenly stopped dead. Little Muk then understood the slippers were magic. Joyful that he had extraordinary magic slippers, Little Muk struck the earth with his cane. At the same time, he heard soft clinking, and a treasure with golden coins appeared from the ground. The cane was also magic. It could show the places where treasures were hidden. Little Muk rested for a while in the field and ordered the slippers to take him to the neighboring town. The slippers lifted him into the air, and he ran on the clouds as fast as wind. In no time, Little Muk landed on an unknown square. A herald was standing on a rise and announced loudly, "Today we hold the runners' competition for the post of royal messenger. Hurry up and take part in the competition." Without a moment's hesitation, Little Muk stood in a line with the runners who were ready to dart away any moment. They viewed the dwarf with scorn and laughed. Little Muk was standing in one line with the runners, waiting for the signal. As soon as the princess dropped her scarf and cried, "1, 2, 3," the slippers took Little Muk far ahead. He was the first to finish, having outrun the other runners. The king announced him the winner and appointed him as royal messenger. In the palace, Little Muk heard a story about the former king who had buried a treasure in his garden when his town was surrounded by enemies. He decided to find the hidden treasure and give it back to the present king. Little Muk looked for the treasure in the royal garden for 3 days. One day, his cane struck into the ground under a centennial oak, and a quiet ring rang out. A large chest filled with gold appeared from the ground. In the morning, an executioner came to jail and ordered the dwarf to get ready for his execution. Little Mook thought that the king might grant him a pardon if he told him about the magic slippers and cane. He asked the executioner to take him to the palace. Little Mook told the king about his magic slippers, but he didn't say the most important thing, how to stop them. The king decided to try on the magic slippers. He put them on, went out to the garden, and ran like mad down the path. Soon he wanted to stop, but it wasn't to be. He was grabbing the bushes and trees in vain, and he was screaming and yelling, but the slippers dragged him on and on. At last the king fell, fainting from exhaustion on the ground. Furious, the king ordered Little Mook to leave the palace, and he kept the slippers and the cane. Little Mook left the city and went into the woods. Soon he felt hungry. Little Mook found a tree with ripe figs and ate them with pleasure. Then he felt thirsty. He approached a pond, bent over the water, and got a scare. A huge head with donkey's ears and a long nose was staring back from the water. Little Mook wandered under the trees for a long time, touching his ears all the time, until he felt hungry again. He came to another tree and ate some figs again. By force of habit, Little Mook raised his hands to his head and cried out happily. Instead of donkey's ears, he had his own ears again. Hastily, he returned to the pond and looked into the water. His nose was the same as before, and he understood everything at once. The berries from the first tree gave his donkey's ears, but the berries from the second trees cured the disfigurement. After his return to the city, Little Mook disguised himself to avoid being recognized, filled his basket with the berries from the first tree, and went to the royal palace. Tradeswomen were selling their goods in front of the palace. Little Mook sat himself down by them. Soon the royal chef went out and started to check the products. He rejoiced at seeing the ripe berries and bought a full basket from Mook. In the palace, the cook put the berries on a crystal plate and served them to the king. The king and all of his courtiers took a berry each and ate them with delight. "Father, father," suddenly screamed the princess, "what's happened to your ears?" The king touched his ears and cried out in fear. His ears were as long as donkey's ears, and his nose stuck out from his face. A minute later, all the courtiers had donkey's ears and long noses. Doctors were summoned to the palace. They prescribed different medicines to the kings, but the medicines failed to help. One prince had an operation. His ears were cut, but they grew again. Another prince had his nose cut off, but it grew again and became twice as long as before. Nothing could help them, and the king was furious. 2 days later, Little Mook decided it was time to act. He put on a large black gown and a high hat. He didn't want to be recognized, so he put on a long white beard. Little Mook took a few berries from the second tree, came to the palace, and said that he could cure the king. At first, no one would believe him. Then Little Mook offered a prince to taste the berries. He did, and so his donkey's ears and nose disappeared. The king took the dwarf by his hand and, without a word, led him into his treasure chamber and said, "Choose what you will. Only cure me of this illness." Little Mook noticed his magic slippers of swiftness in a corner. He put them on, took the magic cane, and tore off his beard. The king nearly fell down with surprise when he saw the familiar face of his chief runner. "Evil king," cried Little Mook, I served you with good faith and fidelity, but you kicked me away from the city. Stay as a long-eared monster for the rest of your life." Little Mook hopped on the windowsill and commanded his slippers to carry him away from the palace, while the king was standing on the balcony in an impotent rage, grabbing wildly behind the flying Mook. Since then, Little Mook settled in another town, where he helped poor people and showed tricks. Everyone loved him and listened to his amazing stories with pleasure.